Greetings, everyone. Greetings, everyone. I see that you all are coming in. We are super excited to have you here with us today. This is our first Collaborate conversation. And I just wanted to welcome you today to our first Collaborate conversation that we will be having today. Our Collaborate conversation today will be on strategies for addressing DEI challenges in proposal development. We're super excited for this conversation as it's gotten some traction on Collaborate. We will note that today's recording and today's Collaborate discussion will be available on the YouTube page. You'll be able to find that 5 business days after. So that is separate from our homepage at www.inkira.edu. This will be on our YouTube page. We also will be sending a link of the recording to your email just in case you can't find it on our YouTube page. But we are super, super excited to have you all here with us. We do kindly ask if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box, which will say Q&A. It's different from the chat box. If you do not have a Q&A box, please feel free to put your question in the chat box, but we kindly ask if you do have a Q&A box, put your questions there. We will have, a time for open question and answering time, but we do ask that, we'll try to answer as many questions as 90 minutes does allow. Hopefully we can carry on further discussions on Collaborate. So I just want to further introduce our facilitator today, Geraldine Pierre, who will be our facilitator, and I'm going to pass it over to her now.
Good afternoon. Welcome this afternoon, wherever you guys are. Welcome to today's Collaborate conversation on, as Audrey has indicated, our strategies for addressing DEI challenges in proposal development. We have a special group of research administrators who will be our panelists today, and they will be discussing some of your anticipated questions that you had submitted in your registration. So let me go ahead and introduce them to you today so they can share a little bit of their background. Let's welcome Michelle Davis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Davis, the Executive Director of Sponsor Programs and Grant Development at Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I have been doing research administration now for a combination of 19 years and grants for over 20. And I have been on all sides of the house. I have been the program coordinator for grant-funded projects, as well as the one who is writing the grants and submitting them, and then also the person managing them. And so been doing this for almost 3 decades now.
And I also would like to add that Michelle is our current Collaborate chair, the Collaborate chair for the working group on our DEI Collaborate board. Thank you, Michelle. And now let's welcome Rashonda.
Thank you, Geraldine. I am Rashonda Harris. I am currently the Director of Award Management and Post-Award Services at the University of Connecticut for 3 more days, after which time I will be moving on to the Penn State University, where I'll be the Assistant Vice President for Research of Post-Award and Contractual Compliance. I've been in research administration for over 20 years. I dare not say 25 because it's definitely coming up on 25. But I've been all over. Some of my of you might find my face familiar because I'm an avid volunteer and I'm always trying to get you engaged and get you to join in the process and the conversation, which I hope you'll do with us today. And so here I am on this panel with these amazing ladies. I guess I will pass it on to the lovely Miss Lanika Mussolini.
Thank you, Rashonda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for participating in today's session. We are excited to have this conversation with you all. As Rashonda mentioned, I am Dr. Lanika Mussolini. I'm the Director of Sponsored Programs at Columbus State University. I've been in research administration over 2 decades now. And like Michelle, I've served at multiple levels from the department all the way to the central office, even as a grant writer. And so I am past chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Presidential Task Force within CURA. I've also served on the Select Committee for DEI, and I have been leading the charge for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for several institutions over the past 10 plus years. So again, thank you all for joining this conversation. We're excited to be presenting this content to you today.
Thank you, Lanika. And now we're going to discuss what we're here today to do is, and I want to thank the participants, though all of you here who registered and submitted your very exciting and engaging questions that we'll be discussing today. We're going to start with discussing what kinds of DEI institutional data, and that would be our first question, right? Should research administrators have at their fingertips? So I'm going to turn this to Michelle, who will speak to us today on institutional data that research administrators should have at their fingertips.
So as you might have guessed, one of the biggest things to do is to be able to start getting comfy and cozy with your institutional research team. They are going to be one of the biggest places to be able to look for the data that you need. You'll want to look for both student and employee demographics. And whenever we are doing this, we always have at our fingertips as best as we can each year as it changes, the demographics that go along with enrollment, retention, graduation, student sat, and employment for students. And then for employees, the application, interview, and hire information, promotion, retention, both first year and overall. And we do that by looking at them by different populations. So you'll want to have the student demographics by race, ethnicity, by gender, and if your institution collects it, by gender identity, as well as just the male, female that all universities do. And luckily more and more are starting to get to bring in more of the gender identities in for that collection. Age differences, different abilities, veteran status, and first generation status. And then for employees, you basically could look at the exact same set of populations to be able to look at the different metric indicators that we discussed a few minutes ago, to be able to see where all of the different demographics lie when it comes to the KPIs, because that's something that you'll be able to, and most likely will be asked to put into your proposals. And the reason I said especially to get comfortable with working with an institutional research is we found at our institution that they had all of that data, but originally when we first started working with them, they only had it by the overall population of students and the overall population of employees. And so the DEI Council back in 2013-14 put together a DEI data subcommittee that worked one-on-one with institutional research to be able to give a DEI lens to all of our data. And as a research administrator, I use that information a lot of times along with talking with IR to be able to get it narrowed down to what proposal we're working on, to be able to use that disaggregated data to go to put it into whatever you might need it for when doing the proposals. So the populations you'll be working with your PI for the proposals.
Are there any other questions from the panelists? Anyone who else want to dive into this? Feel free,
Yeah.
panelists.
I would like to piggyback off of what Michelle said, because she brought up some really good points, and disaggregated data is going to be the key. Depending on the type of proposal that you are writing and the application that you're submitting, because some programs may be looking for specific target populations. And so you're going to have to be able to have that data in order to describe what it is that you're wanting to do and how you're going to serve that population. For example, she mentioned first generation students. And so it's going to be important as well to, once you have that first generation data, but to be able to disaggregate that as well to see where those KPIs are being met or where the gaps exist, because that's where we want to concentrate, right? We want to be able to fill in those gaps to ensure better opportunity for student success. And so I think that's really important when we talk about the data. But yes, the Institutional Research, Institutional Effectiveness Office is going to be a really great partner when looking for institutional data. Another thing is, again, say for instance, if your institution is applying for a TRIO grant or something like that, it's going to be important to know the data for target populations that can be served through the TRIO grants. Is going to be different from what other proposals may be requiring or looking for. And so it's really important too that if you have TRIO grants that recruit at the middle and high school level, that you also work with your school district, the local school districts, or the communities that you're targeting to be able to acquire that data.
And that brings up one more thing that I thought of with the, sometimes in institutional research, there's a person who looks at the demographics of the footprint of the institution. And that is also something that you'll want to always have at your fingertips as well, because you'll use that for a lot of those grants, especially the TRIOs and the other grants that are looking at not just the institutional, but the demographics of where the grant will be located.
Excellent. Rashonda, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next?
No, not at this
Question?
time. I think that both Michelle and Lanika covered it, but I think Lanika has something more she wants to add.
I do. I'm
Wait,
sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I should have included this the first time. But another thing is, if you're wanting to serve the your regional or local community, the Economic Development Office or the Workforce Investment Board, we call it WIOA in South Carolina, they have data and they have a dashboard online where you can go and acquire that data to describe the populations in your community, because some projects may want to know, how many people in the community have a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree or above, how many people are in the household, what are the poverty levels. And so that goes beyond institutional data. So you can acquire that information there as well as from the Census Bureau.
That's very, very good to know. Very, very good to know. We're going to move on to the second question. What we need to find out here is some of our participants want to find out from all of you a list of thought-provoking questions that they can give to a PI to help start writing a diversity plan, and which will be helpful in what is available to train PIs. So I'm going to turn this over back to you, Lanika. And of course, as I said before, any other panelists, please feel to chime in.
Sure.
Lanika?
Yes, thank you, Geraldine. So this is a fully loaded question, right?
It is.
First of all, available training for PIs. I mean, really, you need to look to your institutional Office of Inclusion and Excellence. If you have one, some people, they call them by different names, DEI office, diversity office, DNI, whatever is called or referred to at your institution. I would look there first. HR may also have some training modules or things that your PIs can take advantage of. Otherwise, they may need to sign up for external professional development opportunities. But the thing is not just taking training, but knowing how to apply that training to the work that they're doing, right? So a list of thought-provoking questions, and I think about it in two different ways. So first, if we're talking about a population that we're serving, or if we have research that we're doing that we have to do recruiting for, if we're recruiting the participants. And so some of the thought-provoking questions that I ask my PIs is, who is your target population, first of all? We have to know that. What is the diversity of the population that you're targeting? So, you know, they may have something in mind, but they hadn't really thought about it deeply enough to say, hey, you know, I really want to focus on this specific population. Well, if so, then are those populations represented with the recruiting staff? Who are you sending out to recruit your research participants? What are you including on the flyers or the mailers or whatever information is going out to promote the research? What information is being included? And is it something that's going to be appealing to the population that you're trying to target, because you want to be able to reach those populations? Am I unintentionally excluding populations? You have to think about that. A lot of times we think so much about who we want to include, we don't think about who we're excluding by doing that. And so we have to have an open mind with that. What barriers exist for the target population, and how can we eliminate those barriers? You know, we think about wanting to meet a certain number because, you know, a lot of times the more participants we have, the better our research findings. At least that's how we think about it. It may not necessarily be true, but the more the better, right? And so we want to make sure that the research participants have access to our services and that they can actually participate in the research. So thinking about the barriers that exist, maybe they don't have transportation to the facilities. Maybe they don't have Wi-Fi to participate if it's something electronically. So thinking outside of the box and thinking about those things. Are you being intentional to reach target populations, or are you just putting out a flyer and hoping that people will respond? Sometimes you have to put the work in on the front end in order to get the results that you desire on the back end. And if so, are the recruiters multilingual to assist the population? What if you have a population that you're trying to service and they speak Spanish or Russian or Chinese or something like that, but none of the people that's on your project staff or recruiting staff can speak any of those languages? That creates a barrier. You're not going to be able to reach that population. So those are some of the thought-provoking questions that I ask on the front end. But once participants are recruited, then you need to know how can you ensure that those participants are being treated equitably and fair during the process. You want to make sure that it's across the board. I don't know about you, but for me, if I feel like someone is not treating me fairly, or if I'm getting a different level of service than other participants, then I may not want to participate, or I may not be completely honest in the process if I feel some kind of way. You have to make people feel comfortable and like they can trust you. So that is very important, to treat people fairly and ensure that, you know, there's equitable treatment across the board for our participants. And then how do you ensure that participants feel welcome and respected? I'd like to ask, are your project staff being trained on how to interact with the participants that you are recruiting, or that you have recruited and are servicing for this study? How do you ensure that participants have appropriate access to facilities, to studies, to language services, and other needs that they may have? And then how do you ensure that the participants have equal and equitable access to everything available for all participants? Not just a certain subset, but for all of them. You need to make sure that there is equal and equitable access. Do there need to be wheelchair ramps? Does there need to be a transportation voucher or Can you all provide the transportation? What about other things that go into the study, especially if it's an ongoing study? Are there barriers that exist that you need to help eliminate so that they can finish out the complete study instead of starting and not being able to complete the study? Are multiple payment options being offered for participants? There could be cash, checks, gift cards, electronic payments. You can't always assume that people have bank accounts. And so you have to be able to offer these other types of incentives for people to participate. And then what other resources and or services are available for participants on campus or off campus that you all may have access to that you can share with your participants? So these questions provide a good start to gather the information in order to begin to draft that DEI statement.
That was a mouthful, Lanika. But the way I see it, as research administrators, I'm thinking those can be put in the pre-award part and the post-award. You can certainly separate those into the way we conduct our research administrator business.
Absolutely.
You can
and Geraldine,
correct.
Thinking about it that way, we also have to be able to affect policy on that level, right? So if we're talking about the different types of payments that are being offered, if we have policies that are unintentionally excluding people because they assume that everyone has a bank account, that's going to be an issue. So we have to be able to affect policies at different levels.
That's huge.
And if I may add to it too, you make a really great point, Lanika, about having policies that support, because we need to have tools and resources that support the PIs if we're going to develop a plan for them. And it really begins from the moment they hire and the conditioning that they're putting into the people who will be at the ground level with the participants. That really matters, because those people have to be prepared and educated to understand what the equity means. And like you said, everyone doesn't have a bank account, right? How are people going to access this? Where's my patient population? What impacts or challenges are my participants facing that I need to prepare for to account for my research in terms of being diverse, equitable, and inclusive, right? And then it also looks like this. As a PI, I might have an outcome that I already think in my head, right? We need to unbias our PIs so that they are going into this with plain sight to say, I'm not expecting anything. I'm going to really see what I get, and I'm not going to try to force anything on my population based off of where I'm trying to target it to get a certain response from it. Because I think that when we look at it, I know from a post-award lens, I see things from the back end, which is kind of like they say, hindsight is 20/20. But from that perspective, that lens, what I see is that, we could have done this up front. That would have been more helpful if we armed the PIs and said, hey, you're going to send out people to recruit and to do X. Here are the resources you need to be able to be successful in your recruiting. And we expect you at an institution level to include all of these resources for all of your participants, regardless.
And, one thing to add is a lot of times, especially at larger institutions, the PIs aren't going to know who they could even go to be able to help them to be able to put this diversity plan together. And I mean beyond us. So being able to link into the admissions team to see if they actually do have everything in a certain language, or recruiters who are bilingual, and different services that could be put into the diversity plan if they know what those are. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the resources. So I don't want to get into that here, but just remember too, as a research administrator and you're working with these potential PIs, that you could be that link between them and the resources to be able to help them know what to put into the diversity plan.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And I see there's a lot of activity in the chat where people are inquiring about universities, institutions out there who do have these policies that you were talking about, Rashonda. So I hope that Nkora will be able to, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We'll talk about resources when we get down the length of the session, but we do have sources for those who are looking, resources on the Ancora Collaborate site.
And I want to just add into that, Geraldine, is that it's really important to understand that when you prepare to adopt a resource or to look at what others are doing, that you adopt one from a similar institution, a sister institution, if you will. You don't want to adopt one that's too big, that is one that doesn't really mirror the trajectory that your organization is wishing to go into. You want to adopt one that is similar to your institution's size and resource level so that you can accomplish it. The last thing we want you to do is adopt someone's resource and not be able to be successful because it's too big. That's
a good point. That's a good point. And sometimes when we go to look at other institutions and try to mirror it, that's a good idea to keep that in mind, because you don't think about that at first. You just basically want a resource and you don't think, does this institution have the same setup as I am? Is it a PUI, versus a bigger, so you need to look at your position. That is very key. That's very key. And thank you, Rashonda, for pointing this out. Michelle, is there anything else you want to add to this before we move on to the next question? Excellent. Glanika, do you want to tie this up? You've done a wonderful job. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. This is really exciting. I'm getting a lot of information. I'm starting a new position doing pre and post, so I am taking notes, really taking notes. The next question, as you guys can see on the screen, is what are resources that are available to advance DEI in proposal development and all, following award, when you issue an award. And we have...
Geraldine, I think we actually skipped the question. We're on question 3.
We're on question, I'm sorry. I apologize. Question 3, what are some of your successful initiatives being run at your institution? And we are going to have our illustrious Rashonda. As you know, that was your question, so you can just segue into it.
Exactly. That's why I knew we were skipping it. Yes. So let me first start by saying that I'm going to give a perspective that is not from my institution, but from institutions overall. And so what are some of the successful institutions being run at institutions abroad, all over? And I think it's important because all institutions are not the same. They're different. You have state, you have private, PUIs, different HBCUs. They're all different types of institutions. So it's really important to just kind of give you all a generalized statement of where we're beginning this process. And so DEI is not something new, it's something that's trending more only because it's so much needed in everything that we do. As you can see, there's so many things that are socially, politically, and just personally affecting everyone's lives that are DEI related, that are, really necessitate the need to educate ourselves on what's happening DEI-wide. So what institutions are doing right now are, they had a assessment that many of them did probably years ago when DEI first started becoming a topic. And they assessed the needs of their organization, and they assessed the needs of, where's my organization at? Where do I want to be? And some people took and looked at the results of what they got from that assessment, and they didn't like what they saw, right? And so some people took a harder stance and some people took a superficial stance. Some of those that have taken a superficial stance are now paying for it. And some of those ones that have taken it's serious, you're seeing some really good work come out of it. And what that looks like is this. It looks like an accountability list, right? It looks like, how do I get started? What am I doing? Where do I begin my outreach for diversity, right? That means that when I go to recruit, I want to have a diverse population. Everybody started there, right? But where do you begin with that? You begin at the top. You have to have diversity in those who you expect to enact diversity. If there is no diversity at the top, you are not going to have diversity throughout. And it has to be something that is a requirement, not an option. And there's a difference, because when there's a requirement, it's not like, you'll see some people say, oh, this is now the new affirmative action. No, it's not. What it is that it's letting everyone in the door. So for example, people would say, oh, well, only certain people apply for jobs. That's why you only see certain demographics. Not true. what happens is recruiters have biases, and they would only let in certain people, and so you would only see a certain demographic. So a lot of institutions and universities started by enacting diversity at the top by creating an expectation of what they expected in their leaders and how their leaders would carry and support the mission of diversity for their institutions. And that meant, how diverse is my leader that I'm bringing in? You know, if my leader has a lot of biases, then chances are my institution is going to be filled with biases. So requiring diversity at the top ensures you to have a little bit more of it throughout your institution. And so that meant onboarding. You know, how are we onboarding? How are we bringing people into our institution? What does the demographic of our institution look like? You know, that's a part of the assessment. You know, the layers. Is there predominantly one demographic at the top, another at the middle, and another at the bottom? If so, why is that the case? You know, you have to look at cause and effect to understand how you got here, to understand how you can change where you are, to understand how you're going to get where you want to be. So that's where a lot of institutions started. That's the one that's been most successful, because what you'll see is when you are institutions are hiring for very significant positions, executive positions, they're requiring diversity statements, and they can't be superficial. They have to be actual, factual. What have you done? How have you done it? And what are your plans for the future? Where do you see us? And so when you look at any job, you'll see that. That's the first part. The second part is making sure that you have some way to keep going back, where you're checking and tracking your progress and reporting it, right? You have to make sure that you're keeping yourself accountable. I can start this, but if I've hired 5 key positions, executive positions, and none of them have been tracked or monitored to see how well they're doing in terms of diversity, then I've already done myself a disservice, because I have no measurement of how well we are or aren't doing. So that's important. Those are the 2 things that I want to say is the most important, is starting at the top and then tracking and reporting to keep yourself accountable. Then making things accessible. If we don't have things accessible, then how do we know we're actually doing it? It's almost like you are more successful if you tell everybody, hey, I want to lose 25 pounds and this is what I weigh. Now I've already told you, so my secret is out. So if I don't start losing, you're going to say, well, what's happening? You know, because you can actually see it. That transparency is priceless. It helps people to remain accountable and give true feedback to those that are watching, their stakeholders. And most institutions, we are working in higher education. It's not only your students, it's your faculty, your staff, it's everybody. So it's important that everybody has that and can feel included and a part of those initiatives.
Thank you, Rashonda. We're going to move on to question 4. If any of the panelists have anything else to talk about, Rashonda's topic on a successful program, we just move on to 4, which is what I sort of went ahead of myself. But we're talking about the resources, and Michelle is going to update us on what kinds of DEI institutional data that are available to advance DEI in proposal development.
Okay, so some of the resources that you can use to be able to get your DEI information for the different programs. First of all, one resource is going to be your DEI champion at the university. It could be the person in charge of a DEI office, if you have one. If you don't, then someone who often is working on DEI initiatives at your university. That's going to be your number 1 person to be able to get the university statement out of, for the DEI statement that is required for grant proposals. You'll also be able to talk to them about different initiatives that are going on at the university that they would know about, that could be something that could be put into a proposal that is being worked on to further both the PIs as well as that initiative, to advance that initiative. Look to the library. The libraries often will have resources and accommodations for students. And when I'm listing these, a lot of times what I'm thinking of, by the way, is when we're doing for NSF, it would be the facilities, equipment, and resources document. For the Department of Education, it would be the GEPA, that I call it the GEPA. I've heard it GEPA too. these are things that I integrate into those kind of documents. So the resources for accommodation that the libraries have. I also talk with the Student Access Center or support services. Each institution has different naming for this, but they are the ones who help the accommodations for students with disabilities. I check with the military and vet reps at the university to be able to see what would be helpful for any of the students or employees that are in a grant that would be either active military or veteran, to be able to provide those resources. I look in our handbooks. So the employee handbook, the equal opportunity employee statements that are in those handbooks often, such as the anti-discrimination and anti-harassment. I also look in the student handbooks to be able to see what's in there. And I just put those statements in as well to show that the university is actively making sure that we always do this at the institution. And then we are guaranteeing, the PI is guaranteeing that they're going to follow through with this into their proposal for the populations that we're going to be serving. I talked to the HR department about equity practices such as partner benefits and other types of things that we can show that we do as a university and that could be affecting our grant. I look at the student alert systems to be able to see, is the PI going to be using the student alerts? What about mentoring? Is there going to be peer, faculty, staff, or industry mentoring that would be good to be able to include in this? What about registered student organizations and their offerings that we will make sure that the students are aware of that could provide additional assistance, additional belongingness to be able to help with the proposal? With the library or other areas also, it could be study tables and tutoring that is helpful with what we're putting into the proposals. You could also do processes for ensuring diverse candidate applications if you're going to be either hiring faculty and staff as part of the grant or with the student enrollment that is part of the grant. You could look into, along with the DEI champion again, different types of DEI trainings that are required or that you will require as part of the grant for faculty, staff, and or students. You can look at community organizations and partnerships to be able to help toward the goals and objectives of your proposal. And the same with industry business partners. And then note that as you're gathering all of this information with the PI, you are talking with so many departments across the university or college that you work that often PIs don't always either know about and or have access to. So you really will be breaking down a lot of silos over the years as you're working as a research administrator. If you continue to keep these resources up to date and continually check back in with them for updates and everything else, those partnerships that you have across the university will do a wealth of good for the PIs you work with.
Thank you so much for that information, Michelle. And now we're going to run into question 5. And Lanika is going to take us on to this, where she's going to tell us about tools. What are the tools that we can assist researchers in developing diversity plans?
Sure. So Michelle did a great job giving a very broad view of resources that are located on campus as well as within the community. And I think, when we think about tools, those are really good places to start, right? It's really important as research administrators that we network with people across campus so that we have an understanding of where we can gather some of this data to assist our PIs. And if we're always stuck in front of the computer and working on, our daily routine and assignments, then we really don't know what's going on. And she mentioned the word silos. And we have to learn to get outside of those silos. Sometimes you just have to take a break, but networking is always a tool, right? So you have to learn to get to know other people in other areas because it could be very beneficial to the work that you're doing. And really, it depends on the sponsor and the type of statement that's being requested because each sponsor is different. And I may use a number of tools. It just depends, of course. That's our favorite phrase. But checklists are always good. I always like to go through the RSP and highlight, underline, make notes. And I think it's really good when drafting the DEI statement that you really read the RFP. Look at the rubric. Sometimes the rubric will give you an idea of what they're looking for in that DEI plan or within that DEI statement. And then go to that sponsor's website to see what's important for their agency as far as diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goes, right? Because if they have specific things that they're really sensitive towards or that they're really supported and passionate about, then of course they're going to be looking for some of those same characteristics and qualities from your research and research participants and within your organization. And so those are some tools that I like to use. Sometimes standard language from the sponsor guidelines, maybe language from your university inclusion office, the university accessibility plan, and some of the other plans, the strategic plan that your university have. Go and look at those things, familiarize yourself with those resources and tools so that you can use those for your benefit. They're not just there just to be there. They're there for a reason to help us to advance the mission of the organization and to help our students and faculty to be successful. And so we have to learn to utilize those things to our benefit. And another thing is maybe as research administrators, you can create a questionnaire with prompts on it for your PI to respond to help you to start getting a better idea of the research that they're doing, the populations that they're going to be serving through this research, the participants that they desire. And that will help you as well to start brainstorming and getting ideas about how to gather information for the PIs to help them begin to draft their DEI statement or their DEI plan. But, you know, you have to keep in mind the overarching purpose and the guiding principles of the diversity plan that you're drafting. And, you know, it's not superficial. This is something real. It used to be that some agencies would include something in there. And I've heard PI say, you know, I just write something and put it in there. They hadn't taken it seriously. Well, now sponsors and agencies are, they're more serious about this DEI thing and how it can transform our institutions, how it can transform the research and how it can transform our world, right? So we have to take this more seriously and we have to be able to tap into other resources and utilize the tools that are in front of us to help us to be more successful in drafting those statements, and not just a statement, but a statement that you can actually put into plan, put into motion. You can implement it and you can measure it and see the outcomes from what has been drafted.
Thank you, Lanika.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you so much for that information. And now we're going to turn to Rashonda to answer question 6 about the do's and don'ts that will be helpful, such as, you know, don't include student names and some other examples of diversity.
Sure. Thank you, Geraldine. And to get started, you know, some of the do's and don'ts, you know, when we are trying to be intentional in our efforts to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive, the things that we need to do is remove our biases. That's the first and foremost thing. And sometimes we think that it's easier said than done because it feels that way. But anonymizing the process by which you intake your initial view of applicants is a great way to start as a do. And what that means is, you know, you heard me mention earlier that people would say, hey, well, you know, these are only the people who are applying for positions, when in actuality, that's not the case. Working in research administration for over 20 years, I can tell you that every recruiter that I've had to work with, I've had to teach and tell them what to look for on resumes to forward applicants for me.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I did at a prior institution is I anonymized the process by first taking every single person that applied and bringing them in, okay? Next, I gave everyone an applicant name. I'm sorry, applicant number, not a name. I removed any identifiable factors such as address, schools, and years of employment and education. Those things we don't often think about are ways that have our biases seep out, but they do. Because if I see someone who graduated from Harvard versus someone who graduated from the University of Phoenix, some people are biased and think one education might be more superior than the other. Or for example, if I see someone who graduated in 1973 versus someone who graduated in 1993, I'm now going to think, well, this person might be older or younger, right? So those are things that can seep out and can really hurt us by having our biases play a factor in our efforts in trying to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so that's a great way to start. I de-identified everything, like I said, names of schools, years, addresses, to really just get a start on, let's look at the basics. Who can do this job? And by doing that, we saw an increase in diversity of who we were able to get as applicants. And I'm sure you all will be surprised, but it was actually men. Men is one of the things, one of the, rare forms that we see in research administration. There are not a lot of men, but we started to get a lot of men. And that just goes to show you that something we were doing was prohibiting us from seeing the men in their truer forms and what they brought to the table in terms of experience and education, just to be able to do the job. So those are some of the things to do. The other things to do are to really understand what your university or your institution's initiatives are and tie them into your own. Starting something, cavalier and say, hey, I think I have a great idea and I'm going to do this. While that may be admirable because it could be amazing and your intentions are great, if you tie it into what your institution is already doing, you may actually get more support for it and resources that will follow you. And so those are some of the things that I would recommend as do's, not don'ts, because they are going to get you more support, and resources are always good. And as long as you use intentionality in what you're trying to do and you're being aware of what you're doing, you have the best intentions and you have a better chance of being more successful.
Thank you, Rashonda. That was great, really great. And I'm going to segue into Lanika. I know you had some things in the chat. I would think that, you can just tie this up and we can move into question 7 since you're next. And on question 7, we are going to be talking about, taking the lead on writing a DEI statement in an application. Who takes that on?
Oh, yeah. Great question, right? Thank you, Geraldine.
Yes.
Just to tie what Rashonda was saying, I think we tend to overthink the process, right? We tend to overthink what funders are looking for when really it's things that we should things that we should be doing anyways, right? And just thinking about what should we already have in our pockets? What is it that we should already be doing for our students, for our participants, for our faculty, for our staff, and just not overthinking it, right? So the world has taught us to think one way, but when you look at it, is it fair? Think about equity, think about equality, think about fairness and how it would make you feel if you were being treated a different way because of how you looked or what your name is or when you were born or what your gender is. And so put yourself in other people's shoes and just don't overthink it. Don't oversimplify what it is. But as far as who should write and lead the DEI statement, the answer, of course, 110% is your PI. Your PI should write the DEI statement for funding applications. They can do this collaboratively with their partners, with other offices across campus. However, PIs are ultimately responsible because they are closest to the research and they know what is needed for the project to be successful. Research administrators can assist with gathering other information, such as services that are offered through the Accessibility Resources Office, through the Office of Inclusion, through the library, through military sciences, but each project is unique. Therefore, the DEI statement needs to be specific to the research being performed to reach the target populations, to enhance the research, to support the project's goals and objectives, and to align with the sponsor guidelines. There is no one size fits all. Don't think that because you've drafted one DEI statement that it's going to work for every project, because it's not. You really need to think about what's needed for that particular project and cater your DEI statement to help you meet the goals and objectives for that specific project, for that specific research that is being done. Therefore, the PI should take the lead. We can help, as we always do. We can call in the forces to stand behind us and provide information. However, because it's the PI's research, they are ultimately responsible.
Excellent. And I hope we got that message loud and clear to the community. That's where we start, because it is specific to the funding opportunity and to that proposal that's been submitted. We're now going to turn to Michelle, where we're going to talk about question 8. And Michelle is going to tell us and answer the question about our institution strategic diversity strategic plan and what other DEI sources and tools that are out there that we have in our research administrator toolbox.
So this is the one that we already did about the resources.
Oh, excellent. Well,
but if there are other questions about this, or anybody else has anything more to include, I would love to be able to hear more. I know one thing that I think is key about the DEI resources is making sure that you are always staying on top of what is going on at the university across the spectrum of the different departments, because you can use those in your arsenal, basically, for being able to work on all of these different proposals, no matter which college they're from, no matter what type of research that you are going for, with what the PI is doing, that there's a lot that crosses all of it. It's just a matter of then the PI really picking out the different resources that you have provided that really fit their objective of their proposal. And so being able to show how what is available across the university to pull into that project that fits their goal and objective is really something that I think that's where research administration really is good to have that in their toolbox.
And I know you had mentioned in a group chat about collaborate. That is key. And that falls
Absolutely.
really into what Lonika had just talked about, that DEI statement. You need to collaborate to get all of those information in there to write that DEI statement.
Agreed.
I
And
may
one
add
thing real
to-
quick. Oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Go
Well,
ahead, Rashonda.
I just wanted to add a great resource to have in your toolbox as a research administrator are diverse job board postings. Sites.
Yes.
I mean, it is beyond invaluable. Sometimes we wonder why we are not getting diversity, but where are you posting those new jobs? Where are you who are you giving access? We have a tend to go into our comfort zone. We post them on the same places, but that means we're only getting the same applicants. To
Yes.
really stretch our resources and really expand where we are, you need to have diverse job boards that are available. There are a number of them that are available all over. If you can't find them, I can drop something in a chat that can give you a link to a few of them, but there's ones like diversity.com, blackjobs.com, Black Career Women's Network, Hispanic Latino Professional Association, HBCU Connect, Professional Diversity Network, Diversity Job Board, United Latinos Job Banks. Those are just to name a few, but they having diverse job board posting access is invaluable.
Excellent. To update you guys on how we became, how we're here today. And to talk about this collaborative conversation and how it really originated. So as we said earlier, Michelle is the chair of the DEI working group, and I'm the co-chair working with her. Last year, I was the chair. We sort of flip-flop our positions this year. And one of the deliverables that were required for the DEI working group was that we released, one of the requirements was to do a survey. And so we released a survey last quarter on strategies for addressing DEI challenges in proposal development. And this topic was really trending on the collaborative board. And in this survey, we asked if institutions had DEI offices, they had champions, strategic plans, statements. We'll be sharing that with you later on. And there were many discussions there about some of these resources and a need. We sort of gleaned from the results that there was such a need. One of the questions we asked in that survey was if you wanted to have a further discussion about this. And thus here we are today having this discussion about this in response to the survey. And we wanted to also share the resources that we have been discussing today in the group chat, and to share so that you can share with your colleagues and discuss in your organizations when you go back to your peers. And there are resources about sample DEI statements that we're just discussing here. Or as you can see, Audrey has put out some examples in there in the chat room. So please feel free to use those resources. There's a wealth of resources on the collaborative board. I strongly advise that you guys, if you have not visited the collaborative board, there's a wealth of professional development resources and information there that you guys can use.
Geraldine, we had a question to come in. Is there any program you can suggest for follow-up to check how well it works and lessons learned so we can improve? And I don't know of any specific program per se that I can suggest for follow-up to check to see how well some of the resources and tools and things that we've mentioned today, how well it works. Because usually when we're doing these statements, they're in proposals, and either the proposal gets awarded or it doesn't, right? That's the only measure we have. But I think personally, our offices should really look into following up with our PIs on the statements that they've included in their proposals to see if they're actually doing what they said they were going to do, and if that's effective for the participants or for the students or whomever has been included as the population that they're discussing in that DEI statement. Because again, it needs to align with the specific research goals and objectives. And so how are those things that's mentioned in the DEI statement helping them to meet the anticipated outcomes of the project?
And note that a lot of times they will have some of that information in their feedback from the
Yes.
funder if they
During
didn't get
reporting.
funded.
That is true. So
Yes.
whenever if the proposal's not awarded, reviewer feedback is always good to see what the reviewers are saying about the statement. And also, if it was awarded, when the PI submits their technical report, usually they refer to some of those things in the report. And so that's another way to kind of check back to see how well it worked.
Another thing to think about is that we're talking about challenges that we're addressing with the proposal submission, but what it gives us an opportunity to do is, now that we understand that this is becoming a requirement, is to develop our own strategy from the beginning.
Mhm.
So look at it as, okay, the sponsors are requiring X. What are our desired outcomes? What are
Yes.
we aiming for?
Right.
And then we can track back and measure to say, okay, well, we were aiming for this, and this is what we were able to accomplish, or we were not able to accomplish, and how do we recalibrate what we did so that we can reach our objective?
And
Right.
you know, one thing, oh, sorry, Lanika. One
Go
thing
ahead.
to one thing to tell your PI to make sure they understand is that if this is being required of them from the funder, it is important to the funder.
Mhm.
And so I always have the PIs try to make one of their objectives DEI related, even if the overall plan of their project doesn't
Mhm.
really require it, because we know that that does give more traction. Whenever they are doing their project in the end, it gives them more impact to be able to report back to later. And so if you do that in the beginning and have that actually be an objective, then you know they're going to have to report on
They
this.
have to measure it, right?
So Jennifer Karn has asked a question in the group chat, and I would like to forward this to the group. Jennifer is asking for any recommendations on how to get information on economically disadvantaged numbers for faculty and staff. Due to financial aid, we have that for students, but not others. Any takers?
Wow. I think it depends on the level of transparency from the administration, right? Sometimes that information will come out in a report. Sometimes it won't, depending on the level of transparency. But I think the important thing here is to get people, especially our leaders, to really face reality and what's going on at our institutions when we think about economically disadvantaged faculty members and those who have been doing everything that they're supposed to do to satisfy the requirements of their tenure notebook, of, their research portfolio, but who are being stagnant or who aren't making promotion, or, who's been tagged along for however long and not making to the associate or full professor levels. I think that speaks volumes. When we're not able to retain our underrepresented groups as faculty members, as staff members, then why is that? What is the root cause? And how do we address those issues? We can't continue to sweep it under the rug. We have to address it, or it's going to continue to happen. It becomes cyclical. And then, at some point, people become numb to it, but we can't allow our administration to become numb to what's going on at our institutions. And no longer can we say, it's the great resignation. Like, we're beyond that at this point. So what are we doing to impact these numbers, and what are we doing to help our faculty and staff with upward mobility?
I want to add to it that a lot of DEI offices, once they start, they collect data from their institution, historical data, and they begin to mine the data based off of what their initiatives are and what their deliverables are that they're set to achieve or responsible for. And so some of them may have some of that information just to kind of get started, but it really depends on what they're looking for as to how developed the data might be. but most DEI offices have that type of data. They can tell you who they've been hiring, what the trends are, who's been promoted, who's not been promoted. That information comes directly from HR.
But then there's the accountability part, right? So.
So I want to extend to the our participants here. Please raise your hands and I will recognize you, and you can directly interact with the panelists and ask your questions directly. Don't raise your hand all at once. So I know while we're waiting for hands to be raised, Melanie, L'Oreal, are you gonna, I see you came up first on my screen. Do you have a question?
Sure, I do. Thank you so much. This is so interesting to me. And we do have a pretty newly formed DEI office, and they are rock stars. They really have really transformed our campus, and it's been wonderful to work with them. It's been such a needed office on our campus. And so I'm getting set to start doing a couple just brown bags and presentations with one of my colleagues over in that office. But I wanted to ask you all, what do you all do on your campuses to get this information out to your faculty researchers, whether they're writing grant proposals or not? Do you just tell me more about like what kinds of opportunities for networking and that kind of stuff you provide for your faculty and for your researchers?
We are a smaller shop, and so one of the things that I do is basically, as we're putting the proposal together, I'm both pre and post award, as well as compliance and the whole 9 yards. Yeah. When I am working with the PI as they're preparing their proposal, as we're reading through the NOFO or the RFP, whatever you want to call it, there are so many words for these now, that we will highlight the different pieces and name who we need to go to get that. And so usually there's probably about 13 or 14 different colors by the time that we are done with just looking through the NOFO to where all we need to get this information. And a lot of times, because we are smaller, the PIs do know some of them, but if not, then I act as that liaison and get the introductions working. And a lot of times we end up bringing people from other departments into it. There have been times where we had about 10 different departments showing at our meetings for putting the proposal together. So that's able to be done at a smaller shop. When I was at a bigger shop, it was a little harder to do that. I still acted as the liaison, but normally I had to do the work in the background to be able to get it done, where here we can pull them into the folds.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm sorry. To that point,
go ahead,
I think
Nika.
that for the larger institutions, if they have a research development officer, then they can help to kind of navigate the waters here as well. And like Michelle said, serving as liaison, if you can. One thing I like to do is collaborative sessions with faculty members who are interested in writing proposals. Therefore, I get, several stakeholders in the room, let them kind of hash out their ideas of what it is that they're interested in doing and how they can collaborate with others. And then we have a conversation, try to find a funding opportunity to fit what they want to do, and then bring in other key players to ensure that we can provide what's necessary in order for us to have a successful submission. And so this is not work that one person can do alone. It takes a team. It really is an effort that is collaborative and where you have to step outside of the box. So even though I said not to overthink it, you have to be willing to partner with other offices and work with other people in order to gather all of the information that you need to have a robust statement.
So I wanted to make sure that we answer Melanie Spencer's question about the DEI statement. She's asking about the length. It should be one paragraph statement. She said, for example, the NSF MRI solicitation probably requires just one paragraph. What would you the panelists, suggest would be the most essential components that should be included in a brief presentation for a DEI statement?
Follow the guidelines. A lot of times the guidelines will tell you what's the maximum number of pages or characters or words that you can have for a particular statement. And I think that if I see it almost as like that college entry essay, like you get you a really good base and then you can tweak it to fit what you need it to fit and pull in information and pull out information as necessary. But as long as you have that good solid base, you can kind of make it work as long as it aligns with the proposal that you are submitting. And so there's nothing wrong with that. The most I've seen is probably 2 pages. So it's not anything that's in depth, but what's being said within that short amount of space is important. And especially now that it's included as part of the rubric.
I was just going to add a simple rule of thumb. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. And make sure that you say what you need to say based off of what they're looking for.
True. True. Jennifer, I know you started off with some very good questions. Do you have anything under your belt that you can throw at our panelists?
I did want to tell one story which was really helpful for me. In an NIH review, I have like concrete evidence that the reviewers are taking this very seriously. And so to be able to cite an example of a review committee that we were so focused on ethnic diversity that we forgot about gender. Like, right. And our institution is a Hispanic serving institution, right? And so we were bringing in speakers, we were recruiting trainees, all this, we were focused on getting Hispanic participants. The NIH committee, more than one reviewer actually noted that our planning committee was heavily female and our scientific committee was heavily male. And I was so impressed with that. And I thought, okay, this is not lip service. This is not a game. It's not superficial. This is real. And we ourselves forgot. And so we went back and looked, like, sure enough, our speakers were predominantly male. And who's doing the heavy lifting? It's our women. And so we changed our committee and we got the grant. But I just think that's a great, real example of the fact that this is no longer just our sort of what someone said, like frosting or something.
Right. That's an amazing example,
Yes.
Jennifer. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about who's represented on your recruiting staff when recruiting participants and who's represented on your project staff when working with these individuals, because it makes a difference. It really does. We have to include others because we are better together and we need those varying perspectives in order to produce a better quality of work, right? Yes, absolutely. And another example, I'm at a new institution. I'm 7 months in now, but when I started, we had a proposal to go through to the Department of Ed, and the GEPA statement was missing, y'all. They wanted to fund the project, and the program officer reached out and said, if we don't get this statement, we cannot fund this project.
Wow.
Yes, and they actually read the statement to make sure that it aligned with their expectations before we could get funding for that. So someone is holding these agencies accountable, which is why they're passing it along to us as the applicants. So, hi, Sam.
Hey, hi, this is great. And I wanted to jump onto this conversation because in my experience, I've worked mostly at research intensives. I'm now at an institution that's not as research intensive, but still is an R1. But one of the things that I have witnessed in my career is that they not only hold the accountability in when the proposal is made and the reports are made, but they do it at the site visits too. So if you have something that's really prestigious where they're going to come in, and the NSF does this regularly. So if you win that really prestigious center grant or that large grant, and they're going to bring a site visit in, we had them pay attention to how many of the women postdocs were speakers, how many of the women grad students, how much the diversity was visible to them at the site visit, how much did they actually get to see the training of all of the students as they went along. So it's not just one and done. It's not like you get it done and you're in and it's great, and as long as you remember to circle back around on the report to mention it. It's a matter of like you actually doing it, envisioning it, laying it out, and delivering it so that when they come at the site visit, we learned from a set of site visits that this was really great, and we did it even better the next year from the feedback. But that feedback also helped other site visits for other large programs, including getting us to the place where, they'd funded the first year and then they gave us the rest of the funding all up front. And that's just really encouraging to PIs when they get fully funded and they're able to really run with the program. So I endorse that 100% and tell you it lives throughout the life of the project and not
That is correct.
getting the funding.
That is correct.
That's amazing. And, just thinking back to what Jennifer said, I think we have to really be intentional to not focus on the obvious, right? Because usually when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we resort to race, but it goes way beyond that. And so
Absolutely.
We can't just talk about race all the time. When you look at the demographics, it's very broad. So we have to talk about race. We have to talk about gender. We have to talk about sex. We have to talk about ability. We have to talk about status, whatever that may be. We need to be thinking more broadly beyond the optics of what we see when we look at an individual. So I think that's really important to know that the reviewers are actually looking at these things and not just saying, okay, checkbox, done, next project, and so thank you for sharing that, because that's a great point. We have to go beyond race, and even just in our minds and thinking about DEI in general, it goes way beyond race. And so don't shun it and don't think that it's just a trend. This is a way of living. This is who we are. This is where we're going, and it is really going to shape our future.
Absolutely, especially for us in this profession. The data collection is going to veer off into that era, and we need to rise to the level and accept the fact that we will have to add that as part of our checklist for proposal submissions.
I think it's also important to look at the bigger picture, right? The reason that this is all being required is because they are actually checking, but they are also going to be measuring, right? And there will be a report. They will be collecting this information to see how well everybody is stacking up to it, because it's not something that's superficial. It's something that they're actually measuring, which is why they're taking it so serious and why it's a requirement of not just checking a box anymore and saying, yes, we have a policy or we have this. They want to understand how it aligns, how it connects, because as each of the panelists have mentioned, it's not just about race. It's about so much more. It's about access to resources, and that's for everybody. Somebody in the chat mentioned about rural versus urban. I'm in Georgia, and I can tell you in terms of healthcare, the rural surrounding counties have been hit harder in terms of access. The hospitals have been closing. They do not have access for basic medical care that many of the people in the city do. And so while the city feels like we're being limited, they're limited even more. And so it's about a number of things, not just race related, but it's about access. It's about equity. It's about inclusivity. It's about making sure that when funds are dispersed, they're dispersed to the people who need them, not just to the people who are used to getting them. And that's what has happened. A large part of what we do in research is, the big names, they come up first, they get it, they're doing a good job, they have resources. Well, now what you're seeing is HBCUs are starting to be funded, and they're being funded more because they're building resources that will allow them to take that funding. So for example, Howard University just got $90 million because they're doing a medical school, and another institution, I want to say Fisk, but I might be wrong, but got is also building a medical school. Now they will be able to get more access to funding, federal funding, to do more in-depth research that's going to give them larger access to be able to be a part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, as in terms of how funding is dispersed. So it's a number of things. It's not just race related, it's far deeper and layered.
Excellent. I wanted us to cover a question about, before we close the conversation, is to look at ageism. This has been coming up once or twice in the discussion about DEI. And I wanted to throw that out to the panel as this last discussion before we close our conversation. Do you see ageism as a problem in university settings? How should we address these in proposals?
Well, I want to say, first and foremost, I'm going to post the word side. And I'm going to just talk personally. You know, being in research administration for almost 25 years, I am not that old. I look young because I am young, but I'm just, you know, I've grown up in this field, and I can say that ageism is on both sides, top and bottom. It comes from both sides. You know, older people think the younger people don't know, the younger people think the older people don't know, but we're somewhere in the middle where we both meet and we are able to benefit and contribute together. But I can say that what we're seeing now, that I think when I hear about ageism, the first thing I think about is this remote challenge that we're getting of our new workplace, where it is now a global workplace that's made purely of computers and remote. You know, now you're going to see a difference in how ageism impacts all of us, because a lot of people think, well, younger people, they know how to work computers, and so they're going to be having all the jobs. Older people are getting savvy too, and they're right in there as well. You know, and I think you see the difference in level of communication with ageism and such. But what I think we need to look at in terms of ageism and as it impacts our profession is, are we opening the door to the younger generation first and foremost? Because if we are, we got to make sure that the people who are going to be sunsetting, you know, on somebody's beach, no matter what age they are leaving us with knowledge that we can transfer, that we're pushing back down into the pipeline. For me, no matter what year you are in research administration, there's so much value to be learned from people who have been in it for 30 years, who have been in it for 5 years, who have been in it for 10 years, who have been in it for 1 year. Those perspectives are priceless, and they all need to be factored in. And so I think when I hear ageism and I think about our profession, that's what I think about the most, making sure that there is knowledge transfer and that we are bringing in new people and new generations to our profession.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts from the panelists? And if not, I'm going to turn this over to Audrey.
Thank you, Geraldine.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Geraldine. I just want to thank you all for attending today and participating. On behalf of Incura, I just want to thank the panelists for joining us today, taking time out of their day to just share so much valuable knowledge that they have. Thank you to Geraldine, Rashonda, Monica, Michelle. Thank you all so much. We will say that we will have this recording posted to YouTube in 5 business days, which is going to be separate from our Incura website. It's going to be on our Incura YouTube channel. We also will have a survey sent out. We would truly love your feedback. That's going to be sent via email, so you'll receive that shortly today. I just want to thank you again for attending today for this conversation. That was a trending topic in Collaborate. We hope to have more Collaborate conversations. Please stay tuned for that, for more announcements in the future. But thank you all today for joining us, and please have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon and a wonderful rest of the day of your working.
Thank you for joining, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us.
Bye.